One of the big issues that could split the G20 nations this weekend is a global bank tax. France, Germany, and the UK all are adopting them at home. Canada and Japan, though, are opposed. President Obama wants one in the United States, but he may not be able to get it passed through Congress. Jeffrey Miron is a professor of economics at Harvard, and he joins us now. Welcome, Professor Miron. I want to ask you here, what are the prospects of not only a global bank tax, but a bank tax here in the United States? We were talking about one in the beginning of financial regulatory reform, but we didn't get one in this morning's bill.
So I guess I'm confused. The summary that I read in the Wall Street Journal just a few minutes ago suggested we do have a bank levy, a bank tax in the new bill. Now, of course, there still may be tweaks before it's final legislation. That's just the compromise committee. But it seemed to me that we are getting one. We're getting a tax based on the riskiness of the asset positions of the different banks.
Well, it had initially been backed away from. I know President Obama does indeed want one. So we are sort of expecting one to come down the pike. But can we actually roll one out in the U.S. and then more broadly on the global scale? Do you believe we'll see one? Lagarde wants a €1 billion one. David Cameron wants a £2 billion one in the UK. What are we talking about here?
I think that we're going to see one in the U.S. I think that's what this bill has in it. And once the U.S. does it, that in many ways makes it safer for all sorts of other major economies with big financial centers to add it, because then they don't have to worry so much that if they put one on, it will just drive their financial firms to some other country. Of course, that's still a concern. Even if all of the G20 countries adopted this, some financial firms can flee to countries outside the G20. That's one of the risks of taxing anything, is you drive it somewhere else. So I think that we're going to see a fair bit of this, both because countries are desperate for revenue, also because, in principle, taxing banks in a way that's a function of how much risk they take could discourage them from taking excessive risk. I'm not sure it will work out that way, but it sounds reasonable in principle. So yes, I do think it's coming in the U.S. and in a lot of the G20 countries.
I know in the past you have been vocal about your opposition, though, to the efficacy of rolling out a bank tax. I mean, we're looking at so many financial firms who've paid back their rescue funds. Auto firms haven't, and you look at Fannie and Freddie, they're still in conservatorship. So what does a tax on banks accomplish?
Well, the tax on the banks certainly accomplishes raising some revenue. I think it's going to raise a lot less revenue than promised, because banks will innovate around however the tax is structured to try to avoid the tax. Of course, some financial institutions will move overseas and they'll evade the tax entirely that way. My concern about the tax is that it was put on as basically a populist measure to get back at the banks because we allegedly gave them all this money. And I think that introducing the habit of punishing particular sectors of the economy because they're politically unpopular is a really bad precedent that will come back to haunt us in other ways. I'm not sure. I don't think that the banks have really paid back all the money. I think if you take into account all of the subsidy they've implicitly gotten from the Federal Reserve with very low interest rates, in fact, a lot of the TARP has not been repaid and will never get repaid.
All right, Professor, thank you for giving us your side of this argument here.